Okay, so about halfway around the loop in the R1, I feel like this would be a good similar sort of tempo shoe like the Endorphin Speed or the Peg Plus, which isn't really its intended purpose, but I'm not going to run an ultra anytime soon, so if I have a shoe, it's got to have the use case. Okay, I've hit sub-3 marathon pace. Feels like I'm flying. Right, marvellous. Hello everybody, hope you're doing okay. Welcome once again to a place called Upper Weald. This time I'm stood underneath the tree planted for the Golden Jubilee in 2002, and it's got rather taller than me. I'll show you a picture of it in full glory. Anyway, what I thought to do today was another shoe off, but this time I've got the Mountain to Coast shoes. I've got the R1 and the S1 here. Now these are the first pair of shoes that have ever been sent to me for review, so full disclaimer on that one. But I'm a bit guilty because obviously they were designed for ultras and I haven't obviously been able to be doing too much running in the last few months. But in a way, that's kind of helpful because ultra shoes, well, the pace sort of advertised for these shoes is anything from a 6-minute mile, perhaps for the world record holder, down to a 14-minute mile, which is basically a walk, isn't it? So you kind of think, unless you are an elite athlete, at some point in an ultra, especially look on YouTube videos, most people will be doing some walking. So sort of you feel like any pace for these shoes will be good. So what we're going to do is I've identified a 1.5 mile circuit this time, a bit longer than the mile circuit I did before. And I'm going to run in the R1 and the S1. But also decided what shoe shall I compare it against. And I thought, well, the Peg Plus here is not a bad one because in a way it's a shoe that's completely different. A lot of reviewers say this is only good for a 10K because it's got low stack. But when you visually look at the two shoes, well, they're kind of like the front stack seems to be fairly similar. I think the R1 has a stack of 35.27, the S1 is 36.26, and I think the Peg Plus is about 37.27. So they're all kind of similar, aren't they? And they're all PEBA midsoles. Obviously we've got the full ZoomX here in the Peg Plus, and it's a sort of a PEBA blend, I believe, in the R1 and the S1. So yeah, in that sense, you kind of think, well, maybe they're sort of similar. Another thing about the Mountain to Coast shoes, that the videos I've seen, like a lot of people have sort of gone into the specs, and yeah, I have to be honest and say the views for them aren't great. So I thought, well, rather than just doing another video where I just sort of read out the specs of the shoes and tell you they're okay and, you know, do 2 runs of them and never run them again, I thought, well, I'll do something different here and actually put them into a shoe off and maybe talk about them as I'm running around and see how they feel compared to the Peg Plus and my other shoes. I couldn't think of too many other shoes which I immediately thought were directly comparable. The Endorphin Speed 4 was perhaps the only one that, other than the Peg Plus, that kind of sprung to mind, but I haven't run in the Speed 4 for a while. I've been sort of like trying to steer clear of plated shoes where I get over my injury, or try to. So yeah, let's have a go in these 3 and talk about it as we go along. Oh, in case you're wondering, I've got another Pegasus here. I've got the Pegasus 89 golf shoes, which are about 500 grams and quite rigid because of the very aggressive rubber outsole. Quite good for golf as intended, maybe not quite so good for running, but yeah, they're also like got a waterproof upper as well. So I'm interested to maybe get a pair of the actual running version of the Pegasus 89 Retros if it's possible. I think they did a version recently, didn't they? To see how they compare. One thing's for sure, that you've got a lot of suede that are going to come into it. But interestingly, you've got suede in a shoe that's got a waterproof upper, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But I wore them for golf yesterday when it was a bit wet, and yeah, kept my feet dry, so they kind of work. So yeah, plus point there. I didn't play too badly either. Got my handicap stroke index at 11.9 at the moment, so not exactly the next Tiger Woods, but yeah, at least I'm sort of respectable at golf.
Okay, so if you only came for the spreadsheet, I thought I'd do it earlier this time. So I ended up doing a 1.55 mile circuit in the Peg Plus, then the S1, then the R1. And these are the weights of the shoes. Interestingly, the Peg Plus and the S1 are almost identical weights, and the R1 is a bit less, but they didn't feel too different on foot. And the stack heights and the drops are very, very similar. So this wasn't really like a normal shoe off where I was trying to find out which was the fastest shoe. This was more like trying to see how they sort of compared and whether the S1 and the R1 were like viable shoes compared to the more traditional shoes like the Nike. But I think what's interesting here is that they all performed like pretty well. I mean, I have to say, I think the R1 I definitely preferred to the S1, was just felt it fitted better, and it's a bit lighter, it's a bit more sort of get up on your toes sort of kind of feeling, which is a bit of an odd thing to say for an ultra shoe, but I did feel that. I think the fact that it doesn't have a plate, the foam isn't too soft, but it's not firm like by rigid standards for sure, and you can see that sort of zero sag technology really sort of does help to sort of give you the full sort of stack that it does have. I mean, if you have a look at the data here, I think there's an element of heart rate drifting and quite long recoveries between these. And I think in the end, I actually ran these a lot harder than perhaps I'd originally intended. I think there was a bit of an element that I wanted to get under a sub 8 minute mile. And then when I noticed I'd done that in the Peg Plus, I thought I had to do that in the S1 because they're only designed to be run between 8 minute miles and 40 minute miles. So I thought, well, I had to see if I could actually just do that. And I did. But I needed a bit of effort in there. And I think that's why the heart rates gradually rose up. In the S1 and the R1, I had the same maximum heart rate. But if you look in here, the second half averages, they were all sort of climbing each time. I think, as I said, that just reflects the fact I was working one after another and in proportionate more difficult effort. I mean, at the moment, this sort of pace is probably around a bit of a tempo effort for me. And it was quite nice when then I really went for it in that mile. Did a 6:45. It's the fastest mile I've done for a long time, since back in May when I was sort of able to run more properly. And you see I've got my heart rate up there to 150. If you look at some of the other stats, the VOs here are all pretty similar. Just the last two here, there was actually a walking test, so ignore them for now. So the VOs here in the actual running test are all quite similar. Ground contact time all looks quite similar as well. I had a bit of a problem, I think, with the third one, that they didn't really get proper readings, so I'm not quite sure that's really accurate. But as you can see here, the ground contact time, as I went faster in this 6:45 mile, got a lot lower, as you would expect. The ground contact time balance is interesting to me. In the first two, I was slightly over to the right, and I've got this issue with my left Achilles. Didn't actually, unfortunately, manage to get a reading in the third one, but when I went really fast in the, or relatively in the mile here, I was back over to the left, and when I was walking, they were sort of more even, I would say. These are the training loads from Garmin. So it's interesting that they got the same load running a mile as I did running for 1.5 miles or just over, just the fact it was a lot more intense. So for a bit of a laugh in inverted commas, I did the last two little tests by doing walking pace, just trying to get under the minimum suggested paces for the shoes. So just under a 13-minute mile in the R1 and just over a 13-minute mile in the S1. But I have to say that walking at that speed felt like it was having to put more effort in, although obviously the heart rates here are quite low, but it felt like more harder on your legs. So I think if you were tired and really struggling, maybe a very slow jog might be easier than trying to do a fast walk, unless you're going uphill, of course. I mean, all bets are off. But anyway, it kind of proved, a bit like with the sub 8 test, that yeah, you can go these paces by basically walking, but you can walk in any shoe, can't you, really? It's always interesting to look at the cadence when you walk. It's around about 130 as average, and noticeably lower obviously when it's running. But the interesting, the stride lengths, I'm not quite sure whether this is right. This is coming from Garmin. I haven't actually done the maths here, but the stride length is a lot higher than you would think for walking, isn't it? And yeah, I suppose thinking about it, you've got here the stride length 1.15, but you're going a lot higher cadence, so you're going a lot lower cadence, then yeah, maybe stride length is more, but then again, you're obviously going a lot slower. So yeah, I'm not quite sure whether these figures are right or not. You get very little training load walking for a few minutes, as you might expect. So yeah, all in all, I would conclude that the R1 is a shoe definitely worth checking out, and I think it's a shoe that I'll be looking to do some up-tempo stuff, as maybe a nice change from the Peg Plus. It just gives it a bit more firmness to it, and perhaps a bit more support in a way. The Peg Plus is nice, and I've been warming to that. I did an hour run in it last night, but it is slightly soft, and sometimes I feel like I'm having to run, I think I've mentioned before, very much in a straight line. Just feel like if I deviate off and start curving a bit or turning a bit, then it doesn't feel quite right. All in all, definitely the R1 is worth checking out. Less so convinced about the S1. Not sure that you, unless you really are into these sort of shoes where you need both. I mean, I'm never going to run an Ultra anytime soon, so the R1's going to suit me fine. What I thought I'd do now is sort of go back into the actual footage of the runs, do this in a slightly different order this time and see if that appeals. It was a bit long, but I thought most of it was valuable, and if you're into these shoes, then it'd be a good thing to check out. So I hope you found this interesting. Like and subscribe on that, and see you in the next one, or please carry on and watch the rest of the video. Okay, so I've got the Pegasus Pluses on and I'm ready to go. It's typical sort of end of summer feeling here. It's started to rain. It's been sort of drizzly day. There's a bit of sun, a bit of rain, a bit of everything. But yeah, I decided to get this done now. Put the singlet on, so hopefully it'll soon warm up. I'm going to do about 1.5 miles, somewhere around about the same pace I did in the shoe-off last time, somewhere about 8:15, something like that, depending how I feel. Okay, just ticked through the first mile in the Peg Pluses in 8:08. I feel like I'm actually working a bit harder than I was really intending, but it's all good stuff. I'm on a slightly downhill bit now, so I may even get this in sort of nearer to an 8-minute mile pace, which interestingly is the fastest speed
you're supposed to be able to go in the S1. So I think it's something ironic in my current state of unfitness, whether I could test the shoe to its max in inverted commas, albeit over 1.5 miles compared to 100k. Anyway, I do like the Peg Pluses, walking to them more. It feels like actually at this pace, where I'm actually not sort of just jogging, a bit more tuned to what they're for, a bit more how I remember the Peg Turbos being. So yeah, all good stuff. Okay, for reference, in the Peg Pluses I did 1.55 miles in 12:19.7 at an average heart rate of 118 with a maximum of 133, and according to my Garmin 965 that was an average pace of 7:58, which is perhaps one of the quickest runs I've done for a while. I've now got the S1s on, and instantly they kind of feel slightly narrower than the Peg Pluses. I feel like I've had to pull in the laces here a bit, maybe just the way they're constructed, because there's got like almost like a plastic sort of material there, which feels like you're conforming your foot more. The tongue is sort of reasonably padded, about the same as the Peg Plus, and you've got this sort of plastic at the front here, which almost feels more like a trail shoe, doesn't it? So it does feel quite different on foot. I think the foam may be like the Brooks foams, like in the Hyperion. I haven't had a Hyperion for a while, but that kind of sort of material that sort of feels sort of firm-ish, but not sort of like rigidly firm. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how I get on running these. They kind of feel like they're not actually running shoes, which is kind of odd, but maybe that's by the fact that they're the S1 designed for these ultras, and supposedly got a maximum pace of 8-minute mile pace, which I think, yeah, for me, that would be, if I'm fit, that would be my sort of go-to sort of easy, steady pace, sort of like zone 2 types thing. And then at the moment, I felt like I was sort of maybe heading towards more sort of tempo effort, just the way I am at the moment. So yeah, I'm interested to see how these go, because they've got a 10mm drop in them as well. And I think the actual heel to toe is similar, but because they feel sort of firmer, I not feel like I'm sort of pushing down as much. And they've got this zero sag technology in the midsole, which I assume, as the name suggests, that you don't sort of then maybe sort of squash into it more. So maybe it feels like you're riding higher up all the time. So that's interesting to see how that will feel. I mean, this is kind of bizarre, because I'm trying to run now what I feel is like a, yeah, fairly slow pace in the general terms, but that's the maximum speed that they're designed for. So clearly you can run faster than that, obviously, can't you? You can run faster than anything. But yeah, just it seems a really odd sort of marketing thing. And also the ratio, I think, is rated from like 6-minute miles to 13, and these are rated from like 8 to 14. So, I mean, 14-minute miles, that's like a fast walk for me. I did a fast walk the other day when I got under a 12-minute mile. I really had to go for it, but I wasn't really felt like I was race walking. But in an ultra, do you, people want to answer the question, if you're running slowly, is it actually better to walk at a brisk pace, or are you better to actually sort of actually try and run very, very slowly? I mean, I'm not quite sure what's kind of the easiest. I haven't really done that, but you kind of feel when you're getting down to sort of like 10-11-minute mile pace, then that to me is almost getting down to sort of like, not quite a walk, but sort of getting down towards that. What I might do when I finish these runs is do the opposite extreme and just run or walk like the slowest speed possible, just to see how they compare in comparison. So you can do like the extreme test maybe. I'll do racing activity on my Garmin, which allows you basically to choose the previous activity, and it gives you in theory a real-time sort of pacing, how many seconds ahead or behind you are. Okay, so about halfway around the circuit in the S1s, they're not sort of slow in inverted commas as I imagined. They feel a lot sort of higher than the Peg Pluses, because they don't squeeze as much the midsole. I think this zero sag midsole is called that for a reason. You kind of feel that you get what you get. So 36-26 in these, and I kind of feel like I'm higher up in the Peg Pluses, which I think are notionally 37-27, one more. But yeah, they do feel very, very slightly shorter than I do. I do feel my big toe is slightly cramped. I had to pull in the laces a fair bit, although they do feel quite narrow. So I think for an ultra, I'm kind of surprised how sort of a narrowish last they seem to be compared to some shoes these days. So in a way that's good, but sometimes I don't complain about shoes being too wide. I like them to spread out slightly more in the toe box. So in these I'm thinking oh, this could be potentially an issue, but yeah, they feel very stable as well, which is good, especially with the Achilles problems, and not feeling the Achilles rub that I did when I first tried these, so that's good. Maybe a sign that I'm getting slightly better. So the S1 run was almost identical to the Peg Plus, so just a few seconds quicker. So I broke the rules, you know, by running about 7:55 average pace, which to me at the moment feels like a bit like Elliot Giles did, breaking a world record. Maybe that sort of thing. Bit of a surprise in relative terms. But yeah, well done, Giles. That's an excellent run. I think, yeah, joking aside, yeah, running with me, anything with 7 on the front of it feels like I'm sort of like going fast, which if you haven't run sort of properly for about 3 or 4 months is nice. It felt like just sort of maybe tiring in the legs a bit towards the end, so it kind of felt like a similar sort of effort. One, I think the Peg Plus I was a bit fresher, just felt slightly easier to run that sort of pace, but I was pleasantly surprised by the S1. So is the Peg Plus outsole fractionally wider than the S1? Well, I certainly think it is across the waist of the shoe that Seguso Running mentions. I've never heard that term before, but it's a good term to use. I think at the front here, if anything, it sort of tapers in more, but I think the actual place where you have your feet, it feels like I've just got more room. Maybe just it's just slightly longer, effectively. I mean, they kind of look very similar. And if I stand them up on the end, you can definitely see that the Peg Plus sort of like runs longer, doesn't it? Also sort of curves more at the front. So yeah, maybe the fact you've got the flying it upper there just gives a bit more sort of like room, and you've got that plastic sort of covering for the heel. I'm not quite sure the point of that, really. I mean, we're not doing a rocky trail race, are we? So I think that's a bit of a bizarre design feature in a road trainer. It was slightly wet on that run. Fortunately, it's now actually stopped raining, but there's a bit of surface water here and there. Not too bad, to be honest. And I didn't really notice any issues, even on some of the corners. I mean, I think some people sort of like talk about cornering when they're running at 8-minute mile pace, as if they're sort of like Kipchoge trying to take corners like sort of 4:30s. And they're kind of thinking, well, you've got a real problem with the corner, just slow down even more. But yeah, anyway, let's get the R1s on now and do this last run. Just looking at the S1 compared to the R1, I think the outsole widths are pretty much identical. They've just got a slightly different pattern on the S1. It's kind of the rubber outsole, which I think is the same as the R1R, whereas this one, it is, I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's more like on the foam, as it were. They say it's noisy, but it's also lighter, so I'm kind of thinking, well, yeah, if you're running along and people complain that you're too noisy, well, maybe you should try Alpha Flies. They're really noisy. I think for the R1 and R1R, Seguso Running did a good comparison video on it, but having watched that, I still was a bit unsure what was the point of the R1R. Seems to be an identical shoe with just a slightly different outsole, which was heavier, and one advantage was supposedly that it was quieter. I think, well, you're not running in a sort of like a church where you need to keep quiet, are you, all the time? So very strange sort of use case. Anyway, so yeah, I think in my size, I think anything that saves a bit of weight is good. And well, if a shoe wears out quickly, well, for me, it's a good excuse to get another one. But some people seem to take shoes forever, which I never quite understood, really. I mean, some people say, oh, I took this shoe for ages and it wasn't so good for the last 100 miles. But I think, well, yeah, compare that to a new outsole, and then, yeah, you imagine difference in cushioning and foams and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, sometimes I do get some puzzled by comments like that, but I suppose if you're on a budget and you need to make shoes last, and that's understandable. But yeah, sometimes the physio bills can be more expensive, as I've known of late. So I'm the 5-1 to talk, really, aren't I? Okay, the R1's on the feet. So you've got this dual lacing system. You've got the traditional laces here, and you've got this sort of toggle quick lace system at the front. It's kind of wasted on me to a certain extent, because I feel like the toggle system, you feel like it's sort of like able to sort of like pull it tighter or looser, but at the moment, just sort of like feel comfortable. I've got them in sort of much as I can go. Maybe if I was running for a long time, I would want to loosen them out, but I'd probably actually loosen out these ones first over this one, especially with Achilles problem. So yeah, maybe, and you can see that I've got a bit of folding there, but again, there's another shoe that sort of like relatively for me feels sort of fairly narrow just on foot, although I do feel like I've got these quite tight, so it's kind of how I like them. Also, as you can see here, I like to wear sort of rather thin socks. I do feel with the thin socks, it just sort of allows the shoe to actually sort of control you rather than the socks. I've seen some people complaining about, you know, having wide feet and then having these like huge, like thick socks on. I think one of the guys for the run testers does that, Kieran, and I wasn't really quite understood that, because he looks like he's got really wide feet, and then he looks like he's almost got like 2 pairs of socks on as well, as if he's going to like for a winter hike or something. So yeah, and then you're kind of thinking, well, difference between those socks and like socks I'm wearing, maybe half a size, if not a full size. So I think, yeah, you've got to bear these things in mind, I think. Okay, just walking about in the R1s, they do feel like a bit more racing, inverted commas, in that I feel there's a bit more flex in them. I feel I can sort of walk along and I'm sort of actually able to sort of like bend the shoe at the midfoot, and a bit more like, let's say, the Peg Plus or any of the sort of like the more aggressive sort of non-plated shoes where you can do that. So I'm interested to see how they feel on foot. Having said that, the S1 wasn't as sort of firmish as I thought. I mean, it's sort of a firmer feel definitely than the Peg Plus is, but it's sort of offset by the fact you feel like you've got more foam under you because of this zero sag stuff. In these ones, if anything, I feel like I'm just walking along, I feel like I'm compressing the foam more. And I assume it's the same foam, so I'm not quite sure what the difference is. Maybe they just tune the foam to slightly different purposes, but the R1 is just slightly lighter. I have to put the exact weights in my size, but I think the stock sizes are about 15, 16 grams difference, so not much. And you kind of think in these two shoes, it's almost two shoes which are good companions, but are they almost like too similar? You could kind of think, well, so you've got like a normal Pegasus 41 against a Peg Plus. It's quite different two shoes, you know, with quite a lot of different weights, quite a lot of different sort of feeling. One has got the premium foam and one hasn't. One, you know, sort of feels a bit more versatile as like a lifestyle shoe for walking. So yeah, these two shoes kind of feel like they're sort of like a jelly mold, and they just slightly tweak them for that. But I suppose that's the inevitable when you've got a new company, doesn't have the budget to sort of like have so many shoes. Although I noticed that they've got a walking shoe as well as the R1R, so they've got 4 shoes which are sort of similar. So I'm interested to see. Anyway, right, let's get on with this R1 run and then we'll be done virtually, at least with the running part. Okay, so about halfway around the loop in the R1. Definitely, as I said, just walking about, feel more flexible, slightly softer feel. Quite nice in a way, actually. I feel like this would be a good, similar sort of tempo shoe like the Northern Speed or the Peg Plus, which isn't really its intended purpose, but I'm not going to run an ultra anytime soon, so if I have a shoe, it's got to have the use case. And I think a long run shoe, where it's not one of these hype sort of max stack shoes like the Superlast, doesn't even do my size anyway. So yeah, it's all these people that kind of now need 50 mils of stack or something just to be able to run a few miles. Well, yeah, just try maybe running in some more normal shoes and let your fitness run it out rather than your shoes. Definitely much more similar R1 than the S1, as you expect, compared to the Peg Pluses. And I'm now starting to get tired because I probably run this a harder effort than I really intended to do. But yeah, it's all part of the fun, isn't it? The more miles you can do, then the more you can be able to, you know, use the shoe however well it's intended. And I think just in my head, even though I can't get shoes like the Superlast, I feel like I don't want to be a person that can only now run in illegal shoes, inverted commas, that you can't race in because you're not conditioned enough to be able to do so, which is often, I think, the problem when I see a lot of these comments on YouTube about, oh, we can't run in this shoe more than the Superlast because it's got low stack or it bottoms out. I think, well, is that really you? Right, how am I doing here? Oh, I'm going too fast here. 11 seconds ahead. Right, see you at the end. I sign up there on the village hall, says 1876 and WBS. I'm not quite sure what that means. Is that a school? It feels like it was an old school, like converted into the village hall. Anyway, R1's done. And yeah, that definitely, as I said, felt like racier, a bit more sort of flex in the forefront. I don't really think that this is like a shoe. I was thinking, oh, this is an obvious shoe that's only different to anything else for running a 100 miles in or 100k or even a 50k or something like that, but it did feel like a lot more room in the toe box in these ones. I think that may be because of the fact it doesn't have the plastic overlay at the front here. It just has sort of like a more sort of rounded up. In that sense, I kind of thinking, oh, I prefer the R1 to the S1, but the S1 definitely has that slightly sort of firmer feel, maybe just a sort of slightly more stability wise. So I think, yeah, if you were going slowly and wanted a very sort of stable ride, that might be the one. I thought this shoe, I felt I was getting on my toes a bit. Now, I think what I'm going to throw caution to the wind now and do my loop I did before for a mile. Just put a little bit more effort into this and just see how it feels going a bit faster, because I was about sort of just under 8-minute mile there, a few seconds quicker than I was in the S1 and a few seconds quicker than I was in the Peg Plus. Although it felt like, because it was like the third run, that the heart rates were just a bit higher and I was having to work for that a bit. But I think also with the fact in these shoe offs, it's very difficult unless you do so many of them one after another, because you kind of feel start sort of fresh, then you sort of get looser, then you almost like don't want to like lose to the previous one. So I was using racing activity. At one point I looked at it and I was over more than 10 seconds ahead. So subconsciously I then sort of eased off slightly and just let a few seconds come back. Then it feels like you're really sort of coasting along nicely, because then you got to the pace you want, and in fact you can even slow down a bit. So right, let's give us a mild nudge, and then what I'll do is just a few little walks in the R1 and S1 to finish this off, just to see how it feels. If you do what I do now, you basically go off like an idiot, collapse, and then you have to barely walk it in. And I think basically every ultra I've ever seen on YouTube, they all start like the pace they would go normally, and by the end they're walking. So I'm kind of thinking, well, this has to be a shoe, if it's for ultras, that's designed to run like your normal pace at the start and basically be a walking shoe at the end. I mean, otherwise you're kind of thinking, well, yeah, they advertised it with the guy that breaks these records, which is fine. I'm sure he can run all the way, but less than mortals, like 99% of us, won't be that good or won't have that discipline to go off at a pace that's actually, within their actual ability level, which basically means an ultra, as far as I can see, you're more likely to set off like 10, 11 a minute miling, almost like you feel like you're not moving. It feels almost like a walk. And I think to a lot of people, that must feel like really alien. So, yeah, sometimes I don't just sort of get my head around the ultra scene and just sort of how you actually attack them, because as I said, they all seem to like end up running or not running at all by the end. Okay, because last time I did this loop, it was a mile, just slightly short of a mile. So what I'm going to do is start back by the edge of the front of the village hall here, just to see if I can get that extra 0.01 and a bit. So actually the time I'll get will be more or less exactly a mile. Right, let's get going then. Okay, I've hit sub-3 marathon pace. Feels like I'm flying. Right, marvellous. Okay, so having a bit of fun there in the R1, going around that mile loop as fast as I could go. I got second place on the segment actually with about 6:40 pace, so that felt like I was really, really flying. It's quite nice to feel like I'm actually running properly, but kind of scary to think that I wasn't going much slower than when I did a sub-3 marathon last time. I think for half of the loop I was on a sub-3 pace. But yeah, the R1s felt quite nice for that. I think they're going to make a nice sort of like workout shoe. In a way, I kind of think it's a nice compliment to the Peg Plus, just a slightly different feel. I feel like you can get a nice sort of flex at the front there, no plate in this one. And yeah, pleased with that. So I definitely feel like the R1 is definitely a shoe that's worth checking out. I'm interested to now look at the stats. I think it was slightly flawed in the shoe off by the fact that each one was maybe just sort of slightly harder work than the previous one. So not a true shoe off, more of a shoe off to kind of like assess the shoes and sort of like assess the relative differences between them. So what I'm going to do now, having done that flat out mile, simulate having been totally knackered in an ultra and having to walk in the last little bit. So I could do a token gesture, walk up to the little roundabout at the top there and back again, and see if we can get around about 13-minute mile pace, and to see whether the shoes actually work for that sort of crawl pace, because some people say, oh, I need a different shoe because if I feel knackered in the last 3 miles, I need to get home. I was thinking, well, if your race has gone that badly, I mean, the last of your worries, just walk it in whatever you've got. Oh dear. Anyway, right, let's do this little fun test. I kind of feel like a Mark Lewis in his race walking video when he's trying to sort of do an impression of a race walker and just look like he's sort of, maybe not. Anyway, so I'm on average pace of 13:04, so I'm right on the limit of how slowly these shoes can go. So I need to basically get a move on, don't I? They don't feel too bad as walking shoes. I can feel rocking back on my heels, obviously, as you do walking. Nice bit of sponge in the back. Slightly now my Achilles, I can feel it a bit, but having done now 4.5 miles plus the extra mile, 5.5 miles, then yeah, it's not a bad innings. And that runs were quite intense for me at the moment, should we say, inverted commas. Right, so I'm rounding this, I'm on average pace of 13:02, so yes, we're going to get this in just in the nick of time. It does make you think though, there definitely is a difference between walking and running, because if I was running at 13-minute mile pace, I feel like I wouldn't be moving. At this pace, I feel like I'm actually having to try quite hard. And now slightly downhill back to the village hall, so I think we're going to pick up enough speed in inverted commas to get ourselves under the 13-minute barrier, or pace that is. I'm not actually going to I'm not actually going to walk a 13-minute mile. As you see, it's getting a bit dark, but I'm a bit more light than it is normally in my shoe, isn't I? I just do a same walk in the S1s, see how they compare. But yeah, as walking shoes, they're not too bad. My go-to walking shoes are probably the Pegasus 41s, but with those arch support insoles. But yeah, these are all right. Quite a lot of decent arch support in these, I'd say. A bit more than I thought. Not explicitly, but you certainly don't feel that you haven't got any. Okay, that was about 300 meters, 0.18 of a mile, just over 2 minutes. And yeah, 12:34 was the average pace on the Garmin. So job done in terms of testing the shoes at their slowest speed. Right, we'll do the same now on the S1. I think technically I should go at 40-minute mile pace in those, but we'll try and do the same pace. I'll put race selectivity on this one, see if we can feel there's any difference. I think these should feel slightly firmer, shouldn't they? And slightly less on your toes, but obviously when you're walking, don't necessarily need that. But yeah, I'm interested to see. Maybe the softness feeling will be interesting to compare as well. Yeah, we've got the S1s on now. Yeah, instantly, as I said earlier, these do feel like effectively slightly shorter. I think it's just that plastic overlay at the front. So yeah, it just feels like they're not quite as roomy at the front there. So I also feel like all that padding at the back feels slightly aggravating on my Achilles. But yeah, so I think between the two, I think I definitely prefer the R1. Okay, got the S1s on for the walking test. Instantly, as I said earlier, I just don't feel the fit of these is quite as good for me. I just feel that sort of plastic overlay in the toe box is kind of restricting the effective length a bit, just making them feel slightly shorter. And also quite a lot of padding at the back, which is kind of counterintuitive, as I said to me at the moment, with all the Achilles problems I've got. It feels like it's slightly rubbing. But anyway, let's just get this walk test done, see if I can do a 13-minute mile pace like I did in the R1. Just for a bit of fun, just to see whether you can. But yeah, I was thinking, would you really need the R1 and the S1? Well, I don't think you really would, actually. I think I much prefer the R1. It just feels like a much more of a shoe that's, for me, if it's much more of a shoe that I would actually use for sort of like training. I did a run in it the other day, 5 miles, a lot slower than I was doing today, and it felt sort of quite nice. It reminded me quite a lot of the Endorphin Speed 4, actually, in a strange sort of way. Just sort of feel like a shoe that had a bit of lightness to it, and if you wanted to pick up the pace, as I demonstrated in that last little mile there, then you can. Even at the moment, it means a 6:44 pace for me at the moment. It feels like I'm almost going flat out. It's actually quite nice to actually spin the legs and see how they feel. So yeah, let's get this walk test done and then call it a day, and then we'll go and have a look at the spreadsheet. Yeah, so just walking along, this one just feels slightly less comfortable to me than the R1. A bit sort of stiffer. I can feel my toes a bit more. Just feel like they're effectively slightly shorter. So definitely something to be aware of there. Just feel that sort of plastic overlay at the front sort of restricts the effective length a bit. And they're sort of like feel like comfortable enough, but that padding at the back, as I said, irritates me a bit. So I think definitely between the R1 and the S1, I would take the R1 every day. Just seems like a shoe that's far more useful to me than the S1. The S1 kind of feels like a sort of a less comfortable version of my Nike Wear All Day shoes. So yeah, I'm sure it has a place, but I'm not quite sure the real differential between the two, having now tested them out. And how are we doing this test? Well, I'm actually behind, but I think that's a testament to the fact that the S1, you're meant to go slightly slower, aren't you? So let's see if we can just pick up the pace slightly and get a similar kind of walking time to what we did in the R1. Anyway, you can walk in these, but yeah, as I said, they don't feel very comfortable, to be fair. Maybe I need to tighten them up more. Yeah, right, let's put the watch on this. Stop. I think, joking aside, I think I was spending more time talking to the camera there and holding up the light and the camera. It's now to my traditional time where it's dark and I'm just about finishing my videos. But anyway, well, it's kind of ironic because I've got an average pace there of 13:20, so I'm nearer to the limit 14-minute mile pace on it with the S1 than I were in the R1. But yeah, definitely the R1 for me between the R1 and the S1. Let's go and have a look at the spreadsheet.